Hey there, are you grieving the potential loss of a loved one or feeling overwhelmed with the loss of someone you care about? If so, you're in the right place. Lisa Hartung here, and this podcast is designed to guide you through topics surrounding death and dying. We'll dive into multifaceted aspects of grief, offering you a blend of personal stories, expert insights, and practical advice for your grief journey. May this be a safe space for you to learn, listen, and ask questions about your own life and loved ones. So grab your favorite beverage and let's dive in. Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to introduce you to Jessica Kueck. She is a sibling loss survivor, spiritual seeker, and aspiring memoirist who brings deep compassion and soulful insight to everything she does. At just 11 years old, Jessica lost her brother, a profound experience that shaped her path and planted the seeds of empathy and emotional depth that would guide her life's work. As an Enneagram 2 and natural helper, she has spent decades working alongside others who carry invisible grief, especially those whose losses, like the grief of a sibling, often go unrecognized. Jessica is also a devoted mother, a Jewish woman rooted in spiritual curiosity, and a longtime executive assistant who thrives on bringing order, support, and calm to the lives of busy visionaries. Her journey through grief has taken many forms, most recently surfacing during a traumatic childbirth experience that reframed her understanding of anxiety, healing, embodiment, and resilience. So today, Jessica combines her background as a formal professional organizer with her evolving studies in energy, mindfulness, and the law of resonance. She's passionate about simplifying life, not just externally, but internally, helping others create space for what truly matters. Today, we are hoping that she will share her story to offer comfort and connection to fellow siblings navigating their own losses. Her message is simple but powerful. You're not alone, and your grief matters. So without further ado, please welcome Jessica Kueck to the podcast. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm really excited to share this and talk to you. I always feel like the more I can share my story, the more, we can normalize this sort of thing. And siblings, again, like you said, are often left out of the narrative of grief as the forgotten mourner. So I'm excited to share this story, no matter how difficult it is, and let people know they're not alone.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for you for being willing to share because it can be such a heartfelt experience, and it can be
Mm.
really tough to bring it up and talk about it. So thank you so much for sharing today. And I thought maybe to give listeners a little background, maybe you could, walk us back to when that happened. How old were you, and what do you remember about your family life and sibling dynamics, and how did everything come transpire when you lost your brother?
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of three. My sister is 5 years younger, and then my brother was 8 years younger than me. So there was 5 years between me and my sister, and then another three between the two of them. And in between all of those births, I know that my mom conceived me easily, but she had a difficult time then. In between the other births, there was a stillborn and miscarriages.
Mm.
So by the time that she had her son, he was her miracle baby. Really, she was 41 or 42 by the time she had him, which in the mid 90s was, not as common as you hear now, especially because he wasn't conceived through IVF. So, definitely the golden child, the son, the baby, as as he should be. That, was the child that everyone wanted and the only boy. We had a really good life, like family vacations to Hawaii and, horseback riding lessons and gymnastics. And we were lucky enough to live on a large property of 4 acres, and it had a coach house. So when my grandfather died, my maternal grandfather died when I was 5, my maternal grandmother, my Nana, her name was Lola, she moved into the coach house. So we had like a third parent always living with us. And so it was really helpful, with 3 kids. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad provided for our family. He's self-employed and ran 2 businesses. So he's pretty busy. Yeah. And he's still doing both to this day. And he's, I think, 77 now. So he's kind of those like work till the day you drop sort of guy. So, it was just a busy, chaotic household, but not always really happy. My mom came to the marriage with a lot of emotional heaviness, and mental instability, mental health issues. And my father is a narcissist. And so those two don't always blend well, very seamlessly. So I do remember there being a lot of arguing. There was a lot of triangulation, a word I learned in therapy over the years, especially using my grandma. My mom would use my grandma to kind of be the middleman between the fights between her and my dad. My dad was really financially abusive and controlling because he was the breadwinner. So when we would need something, my mom would ask for money. And if she wouldn't get it, then my grandma would intervene, or my mom would ask us to intervene, and that's a pattern that went on for a really long time. So it wasn't the happiest of households, but it was a good life, right? I think we were well cared for, and we were certainly loved, and certainly had everything and anything that we could have ever needed. So in 1997, my mom and her best friend, who was a single mom, and she had a son about my age, took their four children between the two of them, and they did a cross-country road trip down to Scottsdale, Arizona. At the time, both of our families had condos there. A lot of the people that we knew, our cousins and stuff, were buying up condos that were being built in Scottsdale as the new
Yeah.
sort of place to escape. And so we owned a condo. We'd had it for a few years. It was really great. And the two women took the kids down and they drove across the country. It took us a few days. And then my dad was supposed to meet us a couple days after we arrived. So we got there at night and we tucked in for the night. And then the next morning, the first thing we do is we go to the pool. And it's in the pool is in one of those community pools. It's in the middle of all of the condos. And so it's not like a lifeguarded pool. And it's just, anyone can go in and out. And I remember we were playing. I remember I was a gymnast at the time. So I remember like doing handstands in the shallow end and just kind of doing my own thing.
Mhm.
And at some point, I was underwater, and my sister is shaking me, telling me to come up for air, telling me that something's wrong with Aaron, something's wrong with Aaron. And at the time, this kid had already been in the hospital like three times with stitches because he would break glass and drop things and like fall off things. Like he was just like a 3-year-old. And so he was just, certainly it was never abuse. It was just like, this is what 3-year-olds do. And I was like, oh my gosh, what did he do? Did he fall? Did he bump his head? Like, what could be wrong? And I look over and there's people crowded around him, and I just know that something is not right. And so thankfully, my mom's best friend, I was able to call her a few months ago, and I wanted to know the story from her perspective because there's so much that my young mind had blocked out. And so she kind of filled in some of the details for me. There was another family at the pool with young children. One of the young children pointed out to the family friend that was with us that like, hey, your friend's at the bottom of the pool. And
Mm.
so this other young child who was with us, who was about my age, so he was 10, he jumped to the bottom of the pool to get my brother, and he brought him up for air and called the adults over. And the postman was nearby, and he jumped the fence and started performing CPR. My mom, realizing what had happened, my mom's best friend told me that there were these like kind of river rocks at the base of a palm tree, and she grabbed the river rocks and started hitting herself in the head with it in
Oh.
order to try to maybe like kill herself or incapacitate herself because she recognized that this was really bad, and she was trying to immediately the first thing her body did was want to punish itself, and so I think she was trying to kill herself by hitting herself in the head with rocks. So the ambulance was called. I remember at the time everyone had beepers, pagers, if
Mhm.
any of your listeners remember that. And I remember running with like my feet on like the hot pavement, running, running, running,
Mm.
screaming out if somebody could let me in their house, because this is well before cell phones. So I could page my dad. And I'm paging him, I'm paging him, I'm paging him over and over. And my young mind didn't realize that we had a system in our house. If you pressed two on the pager system, it would be like, okay, dad, call us back. If it was a one, it was immediately emergency, call us back. And I kept paging him over and over with a one, with a one, with a one.
Mm.
And, but he didn't know where we were. And so he couldn't call me back. I was in a stranger's apartment. And to this day, I always think about how horrific that must have been for him to get those pages and not know
Yeah.
what's going on and not be able to reach us, and how awful this must have been for him to be not present. And so I go back to the pool. My aunt takes us all to the hospital. We get there, and the doctor came out and asked, you need to come see your mom. And I said, is he alive? Is he alive? And he said, you really need to talk to your mom. So that's when I knew that my brother was gone. Um, so we went and we saw my mom. She was on the floor in the corner of the hospital room, sobbing, shaking, rocking back and forth, and just telling us how sorry she was for, I killed your brother. I killed your brother. I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible mother. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So then eventually we're able to get in touch with my dad, relay the news. We had cousins there at the time who, like my dad had cousins in Arizona who lived there. And so we were dropped off with them while my family friend, my aunt, I call her, sorted out the situation. So my dad and his brother flew down, and I guess my dad walked out of the airport and just looked at my aunt and said, why didn't you save him?
Oh,
And that was like pretty much the last thing he ever said to her, because to this day he still hates her. They've been in the same room together at, my bat mitzvah, my wedding, but they don't speak. So, and she understands it and she's very gracious about it. She knows why he hates her, but um, she maintained a relationship with my mom, albeit different. And then she was very close with my grandmother because she didn't have a mom growing up. So she was very close with my grandmother, who still continued to treat her like a daughter.
mhm,
And so we were dropped off at our cousin's house. I remember kind of waking up in the middle of the night, panicking, kind of pacing around the room like this can't be real. You're in complete denial.
mhm,
Um, I'm not really sure like where my sister was at that point in the house, but we were both together at this cousin's house. And then I remember my mom must have been put into like a psychiatric ward. And so I remember being taken there to see her. And I'm not sure what transpired, but I know we were taken there. And
mhm.
then the next thing I remember was being escorted home on the airplane. My mom is, completely, she's on sedatives in the wheelchair, and the rest of us are crying and people are staring. And I know at 11 years old how awkward this is and how awful this is. And, I know my dead brother's body is on the plane beneath us. And
Oh,
so we're flown back to Chicago, and then thus starts the Jewish mourning period of Shiva, which is 7 days, where people come to your house for 7 days. They bring food and they just kind of sit with you in your grief. There's prayer services morning and night. You cover all the mirrors as to not see the reflection of your own grief.
mhm,
So that's one of the traditions. I remember my dad's tie being cut. He had cut his tie in the middle at the funeral. And I had to ask why he did that. And I later learned it was because, oh gosh, I'll have to look it up now. I'm sorry, Lisa. I forgot like the exact meaning of it. But there's so many different traditions that Jews have, surrounding death. And,
mhm.
when we bury our dead, we don't have open casket funerals. Jews tend to not cremate. My brother was buried in a Jewish cemetery. And then, then there was life. And then 2 weeks later, I started middle school.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's an awkward time, already. I was in a K-8 building. So, and it was a very tight-knit community. And so everyone knew, and my mom was very involved in the school and the PTO. So we had a very good community around us. But at the end of the day, it's middle school and you're starting with the teachers and the rotating classrooms and the gym class. And so it was a very awkward time to be at my most emotionally fragile.
Yes.
That's the crux of the story of how this transpired. And so it left me as still the only, but my sister went from being a middle to a youngest.
Hmm.
And then, the last 30 years have been, picking up the pieces
Hmm.
still to this day.
Do
Yeah.
you ever speak with your sister about the day or the experience of losing your brother or the aftermath?
I think, we talk a lot about our mom and our dad. That's usually, at the end of the day, I think the greater loss for both of us was losing our parents and losing the family that we could have had. So sibling grief is often considered like what is called like a double grief, like a dual sort of grief, because you lose the sibling always.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of the time, in fact, I would argue to say 100% of the time, you lose your parents. Your parent will never be the parent that you had before that sibling was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you lose your parent. And if you're young, like we were, or
Yeah.
really at any age, you have to then live the rest of your life without that parent. most parents, I think the statistic might be like, I don't know, 6 in 10 or 8 in 10 parents who lose a child get divorced.
Hmm.
Ours did not, but they really should have. But there was a lot of constraints around that. And I think they did their best to keep us together. But I think at the end of the day, probably wasn't the most healthy of solutions. Then a lot of people, then they suffer from divorce.
Yeah,
And
that,
then you kind of lose the family that could have been, right? So you lose the family that the family dynamic will never be the same again. And so that's kind of where sometimes sibling grief gets sort of forgotten about because people forget, yes, it is all about the parents. And as a parent now, I understand. Like it
mm,
is all about the parent. And there's still siblings left. And those people, especially for, I mean, it doesn't matter at any age, but since I was so young, I
yeah,
now have the rest of my life in which I need to adjust to this new normal. And so that's kind of where my sister and I don't really talk about the day so much. But there's a lot of always talk about the fallout and just sort of the really messed up stuff that happened to us as kids and weird memories that we share about times in our life around that time. But in terms of the day, no, I think I try not to think about it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
as I've explored this topic more in my life recently and to started my memoir, which is a very, very early work in progress, but I've wanted to write it for a long time. I've had to explore it a little bit more deeply and kind of I've done some research. I found a couple of news articles about it. And it's been a little bit more difficult than I thought it was, but at the same time, I'm glad I'm doing it because I think it helps me again continue to open up and tell this story in formats like this.
Yeah, and I think it's so and so important. I shared with you before we started recording that one of my best friends from growing up lost her brother in a skiing accident in our
Mm,
20s. And
hmm
just losing such a close loved one is really difficult. And
hmm
how losing a sibling at 11
hmm
is, you still have your teen years, right? You were entering in middle school, and
hmm
we were already in our professional lives when my girlfriend's brother passed. And so it's a much
hmm
different experience. Doesn't make it any easier, and it's really difficult. I'm interested to hear how this was what, is it 97, 1997 that this happened?
Yeah, so I was 11, I'm 39 now, so 28 years.
Yeah. And at that time in, you know, life, what types of support did you receive as
Mm.
a child grieving?
Like I said, my grandma lived with us, and so she was our safe space. That was like our anchor. And she mourned and cried certainly, but at the end of the day, like she was really that rational person who was able to maybe tamper her own grief, at least around us, in order to protect us. So having her was really, really critical to like my sort of sense of safety and well-being. As I mentioned, we went to a really wonderful K-8. I have such fond memories of it. And I had 150 in my eighth grade graduating class, but it's kind of seemed like everyone knew each other because you started in kindergarten. And the teachers there, I mean, goodness, my music teacher who started when I was in kindergarten is still there. She's retiring in a few years, but like she has college age kids now. The teachers tended to stay a long time and we were very involved. And so we had a really beautiful community at school. The social worker, Mrs. Denton, I remember her name. Um, People were really kind and gracious and thoughtful. Um, and the moms of the kids that I'd grown up with for a long time became like second parents. To
Yeah.
this day, those are all kind of like my other mothers. Sometimes I talk to them more than I talk to the kids that I grew up with. My mom did try to put us in therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, but I remember just being really angry and not wanting to talk about it. So I remember sitting there really defiantly and not saying a word for the whole hour because I just didn't want to be there. It wasn't what I needed. And I think what I've learned now, I've been reading some of the grief books that have come out more recent years, especially Always a Sibling by Annie Orenstein Sclaver, I believe is her name. She wrote Always a Sibling, a mourner's guide to grief. And she kind of talks about, the different levels of support that you would get or that you would take on and like what you should do for yourself. And while I was reading it, I'm thinking, oh my God, it's so different as a kid because I didn't get a choice. One of hers, a suggestion I think of hers might have been like, it's okay to like take time off from work, take a sabbatical. Well, there was no taking off of school, Hebrew school, gymnastics, dance, like math tutoring. Like I didn't get a choice to stop those and stop going to school. There's no like yoga or self-care to like go practice. It wasn't the same. Certainly the conversation around mental health right now is so different, right, Lisa? Like
Mhm.
we're talking so differently even in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But for a child to have no autonomy as to what kind of support they want to receive or what they want to get, I'm realizing like, oh man, like I was kind of forced to grieve and process the way that like my mom thought was best or my dad or that the school thought was best versus, I mean, probably as a child, I didn't know what I needed, but I
Yeah.
didn't certainly probably didn't get what I needed. And so
Mm.
I'm kind of reflecting on that now as an adult going like, oh man, like yeah. And that's kind of where I see one of the biggest difference in between losing a sibling as a child versus an adult
Mhm.
is one of them is the level of autonomy you have over your grief and how you get to process it. And I think the other big one I've noticed is, losing the person, such as your friend, losing the person and the relationship she had versus me losing the potential of a person, right? A 3-year-old is just only potential and less of a personality and less of a person that I remember and more of like a person who could have and would have should have been. So
Mhm.
those are sort of the biggest differences I'm thinking of. And then yeah, back in terms of support, I think probably most of the support that I've gotten has really come in my like late teens, early 20s and 30s is just seeking out my own what are the things that I can do to make myself feel better and feel happy. And a lot of it's sharing this story. I've
Yeah.
always felt that not that I don't like the silver lining analogy, but to use this for good.
Mhm. Mhm.
How can I use this for good? Well, for me, it's being an empath. For me, it's sitting with others in their grief. For me, it's sharing my story to tell people they're not alone
Yeah.
because there's not enough of that in this world, I think.
I know. And I'm thinking of like 11-year-old Jessica starting middle school, which,
So
and
weird.
even in my head as you were saying that, I was like, gosh, she didn't get to take any more time off. But as you said, kids don't get that choice. And so thinking about it, um, we had a woman on the podcast a couple interviews ago who works with childhood hospice counseling. So if kids are
Mm,
grieving, like offering them support in whatever works best for them. So I think the climate is just the mental health space is so much different these days. But so
it is.
interesting that in your teens and 20s and 30s were like, okay, there's something that I need to still process about this. So
Hmm.
how can I go about moving through this
Hmm.
grief and beginning to process what perhaps maybe was still residual from when I was 11 and just sitting
Hmm.
being angry, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a level of emotional maturity certainly that comes with losing a
Yeah.
sibling at a young age. And so I think that always kind of carried on throughout life. I'm probably like pretty leveled out now. I think I reached peak emotional maturity. Yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of have to just find your own footing along the way. And at the end of the day, did my mom and dad do their best? Absolutely. Was it always what I needed? No,
Yeah.
but they made sure that we didn't do drugs. Like we weren't out there stealing cars. Like they really made sure that we were cared for and loved and that we had the support that we needed if we needed it. They did their best with what they had available to them.
Yeah. And that's so important, right? To be able to feel like you had that. And so wonderful that you were able to have your grandma to be
Hmm.
there to support you as like
Hmm.
an ombudsman, right? Like it's not your
Hmm.
parents, it's this other safe haven, which
Yeah.
really support you. And have you found that in the years after your brother's death that the family has talked about him? You said sharing his story has been helpful for you grieving. Do you find that the family is open and talks about the experience
Mm,
or talks about your
no,
daughter?
no. No, my dad was always very closed off in his grief. He was angry. I think, if he spoke to anyone, he may have spoken to our rabbi, but I certainly he didn't ever went to therapy or sought anything outside of that. My mom every year on my brother's birthday would make us go to the cemetery, which I just hated. I hated it. And she would make us pick out a gift for like whatever year old he was. So if he was turning 9, we had to go pick out a gift for a 9-year-old. And then we'd have to put it on his grave and like decorate the grave with all the flowers. And it was just like, it was how she wanted to grieve him and how she wanted to celebrate his birthday and how she wanted us to like share stories and memories. But like, that's not what maybe necessarily I wanted. And so that eventually, when I think, again, I got to make my own choices, probably around 16, 17, I stopped going because that didn't spark joy in me. That didn't help bring me closer to him
Yeah.
because I feel that he's always with me, he's around me. I don't need to go to a cemetery to feel that. And so eventually, I think now that my mom is a grandmother and that, she has my daughter, I think maybe more stories get brought up of like, oh, your brother loved wearing cowboy boots. And so she'll like buy cowboy boots for my daughter. Or my daughter will do something and my mom will just say like, oh, Aaron used to love doing that. Or Aaron loved X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, there's not a lot of like talk about him in the family, but the presence is always there no matter how sad it is,
Hmm.
right? Like it's always there. It's always there in their house. It's always there when we're all together as a family with my sister. And it's kind of like always there. I always see it in their eyes when they're with my daughter and they're looking at, because she's the only grandchild. I just always see it in their eyes of how much joy she brings them. And I think it's like an extra level of joy,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I try very hard to make sure that they know that she's not a replacement for him and that, let's not put too much pressure on the 4-year-old to be because she doesn't know yet who her Uncle Aaron is. She saw a picture of him in my meditation corner where I keep pictures of my loved ones. And she asked me who he was. And I just said, he's someone I used to know a long time ago. And so, and she will learn about him, but she's so young that I don't want her to think that people at that age die because she's already in the period of asking about death.
Oh.
Um, yeah, like it's very, I think, developmentally normal for a 4.5-year-old.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't need her right now to think that young people die. So we're kind of waiting on that conversation.
Yeah. And that's something that's interesting that you say that, when you can see it in your parents' eyes when they're with your daughter. Because my friend talks a lot about how she has three little boys. And so her parents,
Mm,
after losing a son, she now has three boys,
mm,
or my girlfriend. And she said that the holidays feel so much different now that there's that new life in the family and
yes.
that it's a feeling of completeness that's different,
Hmm.
but it's like that rebirth of joy, right? It's like,
Yes.
okay, we can feel a different
It
kind of
is.
joy now.
Yeah. It is a breaking of tension for our family
Mm,
because it just never felt like we could truly be happy around each other,
mm,
right? Like there was always an underlying anger, or for me, probably more resentment and just like an uncomfortable level of like uncomfortableness.
mhm,
But with my daughter now, she's just such a tension. Also she's 4 and she's hilarious and, she keeps everyone on their toes. But I just think, yeah, it's a birth of a new joy. And I always wanted a child. I didn't give my parents a grandchild because they wanted it. But I'm glad that I've been able to do this. And it does feel like it's healed us in a little bit of a different way.
mhm. She's kind of bringing the family back together.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a new way. And so now, as a mom, and your daughter is, just a little bit older than
Hmm.
Aaron when he passed, how do you feel in your parenting, right? Because now you can experience or
Hmm.
think about what your mom may have felt at that time
Hmm.
of Aaron's passing.
Yeah. So I think as an 11-year-old who, my mom, she had her mother, but then after that she had me because she didn't have my dad to lean on, right? Like his narcissism, he openly blamed her, called her horrible names and said, you killed my son. Just a lot of emotional and verbal and financial abuse, never physical, but a lot of other abuse in that household. And so she really like leaned on me, maybe unknowingly, that to like take care of her feelings. And so I kind of always felt like I lost a child growing up. It for like yes, I knew I lost a sibling, but for me it was far greater than that because of the level of emotional caretaking I did on behalf of my mother. And
Wow.
so I was always like hyper vigilant. We would still go on vacation as a family and we'd be at the pool and we would take these beautiful vacations and you would see all four of us eyes on every other child in the pool. We'd see little 2 and 3-year-olds running around the pool and like if we didn't see a parent right behind them, for a fact that someone in my family was going to get up and watch that kid like a hawk because we were also hyper vigilant after that. And so it never really felt like I was just a kid losing a sibling. It felt much greater than that. So then when I became a mother, I still identified much more with my mom and I still identified much more in the role of a parent losing a child. But for me, it wasn't such as a great leap as maybe someone else might have felt, for instance. And again, I think that might be the age that I was and the age my brother was versus perhaps your friend when she lost her brother. She really lost her brother, her person that
Mhm.
she had a 8-year relationship with
Yeah.
versus my relationship with my brother was so short-lived. And much of that I was in school 5 days a week. So how much time did I really spend with the child? Not as much as I would have liked. And so I think for me, it was always a little bit of it was like a maternal loss. And so, but now as a mom, yeah, there is a different level of understanding of that you can truly never understand until you become a parent, no matter how much you love children. If you're a nanny, I mean, I used to be a nanny and I thought like, oh, I know what parenting's like. And then I had a kid. I was like,
You're
oh
like,
no, no, my heart's outside my body all day long. Like when she's at daycare, I drop her off and I immediately have a panic attack that something's going to happen to her. And that's, it's a lot of stuff you have to work through as a mother to try to like release the control and trust the universe that your child is safe and
yeah.
do whatever breathing you have to do to get through that. But there is a different level of that. And so I've also very consciously tried my husband, who has known my story since probably the hour I met him. I'm sure I told him because I don't really ever keep this a secret. I think it's a big part of who I am and explains a lot about who I am. We both try to be very vigilant and safe, but we try not to let fear dictate our lives,
Yeah.
especially around water. We've repeated the mantra in our household, what's the number one rule in swimming? And then our daughter has to tell us. And the number one rule of swimming is you only swim with a grown up.
Yeah.
So, mom, dad, coach, auntie, uncle, like and so we repeat that over and over throughout the year. It doesn't even have to be like when we're swimming or on vacation, but I also don't want her to be fearful of water.
Right.
And it's like that with a lot of things in life. And certainly, like her dad swings her much higher than I do on the swing at the park, like the big swing. And he probably, and I probably let her wander. In fact, this morning, I let her out of my sight when I was putting away groceries and I couldn't find her when I came outside. And that's because we were on our way to school, but our grocery delivery had shown up right as we were leaving. And so I left her outside for a moment, went in, threw the groceries in really quick. I couldn't have been in more for 30 seconds. And we live in like a very safe, beautiful neighborhood. And I came outside and she was gone. And that's because, I'm screaming her name. I'm about to start sobbing. I'm pulling out my phone to call 911. And she had put herself in the car to start getting ready to go to school.
Goodness.
Like, so I'm not the perfect parent, and I am certainly not like maybe the most vigilant as I should be. But at the same time, I think, we're all doing our best, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I try not to let fear, again, dictate how we live our life. I still want us to be able to enjoy everything that we can within reasons, right? Within
Yeah.
reason.
And I think it's really wonderful that you're like, look, I don't want us to live in fear of water, right? And
Mhm.
being able to see your daughter swim in water, be able to swim in water. Do you
Mhm.
ever get PTSD of, I guess during the day, you were not necessarily seeing him at the bottom of the pool, but you were
Mhm.
there. And so, as you said, you're hawkeyes on other kids as an adult now that you go.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like anxious or PTSD tendencies when you're at the pool or near a body of water?
The time that I get most anxious at the pool is actually I cannot like face down do laps and swim.
Mm,
So I hurt my ankle the year before I got married, and so I couldn't do any high impact exercises. And so I tried to swim as, instead of doing like running or something. And within like 2 laps, I was like, I can't do this. It's like a visceral reaction. It's pure PTSD. I can see his body in the bottom of the pool. And I think it's because it's very quiet and very still, and you can hear the water sloshing in your ears. And so there might be moments like when I'm swimming underwater with my daughter, and if I'm underwater and it's very still and quiet and I can hear the water sloshing in my ears, I start to get that panicky feeling.
mm,
With her, not so much because I just know that the adults around her, myself and my husband, and anyone we're with, are very vigilant with her. My sister lives in Las Vegas and has a pool. And so my sister is probably the only other person that I trust outside me and my husband to be as vigilant as I am.
mhm.
I mean, my parents as well, but in terms of people who actually do watch her, from time to time, it would be very hard for me to let her go swimming with another family right now. It would take a lot of reassurances on my part to make sure that this other family, whoever she would go with, would watch her swimming. My
Yeah.
sister has everyone in Vegas has a pool. And so when we've gone there, we will sometimes leave my daughter with my sister. And my husband and I will go down to the strip for the night and like have a night out for adults because it's free babysitting,
Yeah.
which
Like a
we don't
kid.
often get.
Yeah.
And so my sister and and my sister again, just as vigilant as I am, would be just as Hawkeyes as I am, but we still have to sit down and talk about it. And she still has to give me reassurances about what and reminders about what safety mechanisms are in place at the house so that, I make sure that I'm comfortable to leave my daughter. And that's with my sister, who is, again, the only other person I think who would be as understanding of the situation as I am,
Yeah.
outside of my husband. And so, yeah. And and then there's always just a general sense of like, I think more awareness of other people's kids at the pool than maybe other parents might have. I'm
Mhm.
not saying other parents are any worse than I am because I'm sure there are situations, like I'm sure there's a parent who would never have let their daughter be outside in the front yard for 30 seconds while they put the groceries away. I'm sure. And they're probably listening to the story going, oh my God, I can't believe she did that. Versus me watching another mom like maybe leave her child at the pool unattended for 30 seconds, a minute.
Yeah.
I know that I'm watching that child, but I don't know if anyone else is.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's a good question. No one's really asked me about that. I will say that my mom paid for the swim lessons for my daughter, and that was a little bit of, it's kind of her penance, she calls it. Um,
Mhm.
it makes her feel better, I think, to know.
Yeah.
And she's come to a few lessons and watched my daughter. I can tell it's hard for her to watch, but my daughter's like a pretty great swimmer now. Why is it private swim lessons were key
Yes.
to that, but my mom was more than happy to pay for it. And I think we're going to continue that and continue to make sure that we have, she's a strong swimmer, but also that she knows the rules. And again, the number one rule, there is no substitute ever for active adult supervision. If I can give one PSA ever.
Yeah. Yes. Like always have an adult, right? The
Yeah.
mantra.
Our we
When
use
you
like a tag
can.
out system of if I need to get out and go to the bathroom or check my phone, I just make sure my husband, hey, you have eyes on her. Or if he's going to do something like usually we're in the pool together, but if one of us needs to be off for a reason, like we verbally confirm it.
Mm,
Because then we know there's no assumption that yes, he has eyes on her.
right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I like that you've put things in place and so that you feel comfortable, knowing that these, procedures are going to help your daughter. And now she's a great swimmer, which is such a joy too.
Yeah.
Is there anything, Jessica, as we close, that you might suggest to other siblings who are mourning? Because we talked
Mm,
before we started recording about how hard it is to find resources for the silent mourners.
yeah. Luckily, there has been a shift in the conversation just within, like, I think the past year. There is a podcast out there called the Surviving Siblings podcast. There's a woman named Maya who started that, where she tells her story of her brother's death, his murder, but then she interviews other siblings from all different ages and manners of death of their siblings. There's that podcast. There's other, certainly now with the age of the internet, you can find a lot of resources. There's a Substack out there that I have found, but there's also some really great new books out there. Again, this one, Always a Sibling. And then there's one by the name of Dawn DiRaimondo. I forget the name of her book, but it's a shorter book. And she intentionally did that so that she kind of said, I just want someone, if they lose a sibling, to just have something that's easy and quick to get through. And I would say both of those books are really, they're less narrative and more really kind of almost like a guidebook for how you deal with your sibling grief. I would say, find the thing that resonates with you and don't feel like you need to grieve how other people in your family grieve. And I think for me personally, you don't need to grieve how your parents grieved, and you are not responsible for your parents' grief.
Mm,
So as a child, I wasn't aware of that. And it's certainly the conversation now, there's a lot about boundaries but I still see it in adult friends who have lost siblings and how now there is even more enmeshment in a family, especially if there was to start with, and a lot of boundaries being crossed because they are holding their own grief along with their parents. And
yeah.
the parent, I don't want to say that there's a bigger or a lesser person who has lost something. I do think probably the parental loss is the most unnatural loss of a parent of a child.
Mhm.
That's just the most unnatural thing in the world to happen. We can lose grandparents, you lose parents, and eventually a lot of us you will lose your sibling at some point. It should be when you're older, but to
Right.
lose a child really is that most unnatural of things in the order of life. But that doesn't mean that your grief is not important, and you are not responsible for your parents' grief. As heavy and as hard as that is to hear, their grief is insurmountable. And if you're a sibling, chances are you're going to now outlive your parent because you're the child and you have a long life ahead of you. And so do what you can to care for your own grief versus also feeling like you need to carry that of someone else, especially the parent.
Mm. Yeah. Put your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
That can be
And
hard.
that may take years, right? Like that's going to
Yeah.
take years to get the oxygen mask on, but a lot of times, I mean, growing up that was the unfortunately that was the dynamic in my family, and that we were sort of expected to carry the grief of our parents. And now I've learned that that's not really, I don't want to call it normal, but it didn't have to be that way. And now I'm learning to just carry my own grief and know and empathize and love my parents and know how hard life is for them to have lost a child, and appreciate all they did for me in the aftermath and how they chose to stay here on this earth instead of leaving. But also that I don't have to hold your grief, and it's okay to only hold mine.
Yeah. So profound, Jessica. Like, and those are lessons that you learn when living through grief, right?
Yeah, there's
And oh, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and being a support. And if anyone wants to reach out and continue the conversation, and I'm excited to read your memoir when it comes out.
fingers crossed. If there's anyone out there who can coach me or offer
Yeah.
advice, please do.
How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, I'm a total nerd and I don't have social media because it's bad for my mental health. I do have Facebook. I use it pretty much strictly for the marketplace aspect. So you can find me on there. We can link to it in the show notes. It's Jessica Renee. I'd be more than happy to provide my email address as well. I think it's a great way to get in touch with me. But no Instagram, no TikTok. Trying to preserve every last ounce of mental health that I still have left.
And you know what? I think that that is so vitally important that you're like, nope, I'm cutting it out, and
Yeah,
living life. So.
yeah.
Oh,
It's been
well, thank you again so much for your
no.
time. And I'm truly appreciative. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that significant loss and carry that with you throughout your life. But what you're doing now and sharing Erin's story and the experience of the loss is so helpful for others who are also walking a similar path. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for telling your story and giving us this platform to share ours. And we all really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Giving Grief Grace. If you found the content interesting and think it could help a friend or a loved one, please share it with them. Subscribe to this podcast and get a weekly dose of positivity. And while you're at it, please leave a review. If you enjoyed the show and want to support me financially on my grief journey, I'm raising funds for Project Purple, a nonprofit whose mission is to see a world without pancreatic cancer. I'm doing this by running the New York City Marathon in November 2025, and I'll leave a link to my fundraising page in the show notes. If you've lost a loved one and are looking for support in an online community, consider joining our free private Facebook group, Giving Grief Grace. May you be kind to yourself in the week ahead and give yourself grace. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.